Look at this. It is elegant, isn't it? A true giant of the skies. This is the Airbus A340. Now look at this. It's being torn apart, scrapped, crushed into metal cubes. Here is the mystery. The A340 is technically one of the safest planes ever built. In over 30 years of flying, not a single passenger has ever died in an accident on this aircraft. Zero. Usually, airlines keep safe planes forever. But with the A340, they did the opposite. They retired them faster than any other modern jet. Why? The answer isn't about bad engines or poor design. It is much sadder than that. The A340 was an engineering masterpiece. It was the perfect plane for an era that ended the exact moment it started flying. Before we dive into this story of bad luck and big ambitions, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot. Now let's find out where it all went wrong. Born in the age of fear. To understand the tragedy of this plane, we have to look at its wings. Why does it have 4 engines? Today, almost every long-distance plane has only 2. 4 engines mean more fuel, more maintenance, and much more money. It seems like a waste. But in the 1980s, where the A340 was designed, this wasn't a mistake. It was a necessity. Back then, aviation was controlled by something called the 60-minute rule. The rule was simple. If a plane has only 2 engines, it was not allowed to fly more than 60 minutes away from the nearest airport. Regulators were terrified. They thought that if one engine failed over the ocean, the second one might fail too, leaving the plane to glide into the water. This was a huge problem for airlines. You cannot fly straight across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean if you have to stay close to land. So Airbus made a strategic bet. They designed the A340 with 4 engines. This allowed the plane to fly anywhere, crossing any ocean without restrictions. Airbus didn't just sell the technology, they sold the feeling of safety. Their marketing slogan was legendary: 4 engines, 4 long hours. They were basically telling the world, 2 engines are for short trips. Real, safe, intercontinental travels needs 4. Airbus bet billions of dollars on one specific idea, that the world would always be afraid of flying over the ocean on 2 engines. It was a smart bet in 1980s, but the world was about to change. Betrayal of the rules. ETOPS and the curse of timing. Just as the first A340s were being delivered to customers, the rules of the game changed completely. A new acronym appeared in the aviation world. Officially, it stands for Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards. But pilots had a funnier name for it: engines turn or passengers swim. Jokes aside, ETOPS meant that engine technology had become incredibly reliable. Regulators looked at the data and realized that modern engines almost never failed. So they increased the limit. First 220 minutes, then 280 minutes away from an airport. Suddenly, the oceans were open for twin-engine planes. This was a nightmare for Airbus. Their main advantage, having 4 engines for safety, was no longer unique. And then the true villain of this story arrived: the Boeing 777. The 777 was a monster. It could carry the same number of passengers as the A340. It could fly the same long distances. But it did all of this with only 2 engines. For airline accountants, A plane with 2 engines is much cheaper than a plane with 4. You buy 2 fewer engines, you repair 2 fewer engines. The maintenance cost dropped by nearly 30%. Almost overnight, the A340 became obsolete. It was like buying the best DVD player in the world on the exact day Netflix was invented. Flying hairdryer. If you talk to pilots or aviation fans, they often laugh when you mention the A340, specifically the 300 version. They have a special nickname for its engines, the Hairdryers. Why? Because Airbus made a strange decision choice. To save fuel, they didn't put massive powerful engines on the plane. Instead, they used 4 small CFM56 engines. These are excellent engines for a small plane, like the Boeing 737, but on a huge, heavy A340 filled with hundreds of passengers and fuel for 12-hour flight, they looked tiny. The result is that the A340 climbs incredibly slowly. When you watch a video of this plane taking off, it feels like it will never leave the ground. It seems to use every single meter of the runway. This slow climb created one of the most famous jokes in aviation history. The A340 doesn't actually fly by aerodynamics. It is so slow that the Earth curves are way beneath it. In reality, the plane was doing exactly it was designed to do. It was optimized for efficiency, not power. But the reputation stuck. To the world, it looked like a weak giant struggling to get into the sky. A stab in the back from his own brother. But the A340 didn't just lose to Boeing. The most painful blow came from inside of its own family. You see, when Airbus designed the A340, they also designed a twin brother, the Airbus A330. These 2 planes are almost identical. They share the same fuselage, the same wings, and the same cockpit. If you sit inside as a passenger, you cannot tell the difference. The only real difference is under the wings. Originally, this made perfect sense. The A330 was designed for medium distances, and the A340 was the long-range expert. They were supposed to work together as a team, but then technology improved. The A330 got better engines and could carry more fuel. Slowly, it started flying farther and farther. Soon, the short-range brother could fly across the Atlantic just as easily as the 4-engine giant. Airlines asked a simple question: why should we buy the expensive A340 if the cheaper A330 can do the same job? It became a classic case of corporate cannibalism. The A330 became a global bestseller, while the A340 gathered dust. Airbus had accidentally built the weapon that killed their own flagship. Attempt at revenge. A340-600. Airbus didn't give up without a fight. They decided that if they couldn't beat Boeing on efficiency, they would beat them on size. They made it longer. And then they made it even longer. The result was the A340-600. At the time, it was the longest passenger plane in the world. It was so long and thin that people gave it a nickname, the Flying Pencil. It was a beast of a machine, designed to carry almost 400 passengers. And because the plane was so long, engineers had to be creative to save space. This led to one of the coolest features in modern aviation. On some A340-600s, you won't find the toilets in the main cabin. Instead, you see a staircase leading down into the darkness. If you walk down the stairs, you find a block of toilets located in the cargo hold, underneath the passengers. It looks futuristic, almost like a private jet or a nightclub. Passengers love it. But cool toilets couldn't save the plane. Just as the flying pencil entered the market, Boeing released their ultimate weapon, the 777-300ER. It was almost the same size as the A340-600. It had the same range. But once again, it had only two massive engines. The Boeing 777-300ER burned 20% less fuel. For airlines, the choice was obvious. The A340-600 was a beautiful engineering achievement, but economically, it was dead on arrival. Absurd accidents. Lucky in misfortune. I said in the start that the A340 was incredibly safe, but that doesn't mean it hasn't crashed. In fact, the A340 has a strange record. Usually, when a big jet is destroyed, it is a tragedy with many victims. But with the A340, it is a miracle. In 2005, Air France Flight 358 landed in Toronto during a terrible storm. The runway was wet and slippery. The plane didn't stop. It shut off the end of the runway and burst into flames. The aircraft was completely destroyed by the fire. And yet, all 309 people on board survived. They evacuated in less than 90 seconds. It proved that the A340 was built like a tank. It protected its passengers until the very end. But the most famous accident didn't happen in the sky. It happened on the ground. And it is the perfect example of this plane's bad luck. In 2007, at the Airbus factory in Toulouse, engineers were testing a brand new A340-600. It was painted in the beautiful colors of Etihad Airways, ready to be delivered. The crew needed to test the engines, but they made a foolish mistake. They didn't put hooks, safety blocks behind the wheels. Then they turned all four engines to maximum power.
$200 million straight into the wall. I don't know how we're going to explain this one.
The brakes screamed. The plane overpowered them. It lurched forward and smashed straight into a concrete wall. The front of the plane was crashed. The cockpit broke off. A brand new $200 million jet was written off as scrap metal before it had carried a single paying passenger. That is the story of the A340. Tough enough to save everyone in a disaster, but unlucky enough to crash into a wall before leaving the factory. So where are these giants today? If you go to a major airport, you probably won't see one. Most A340s have been sent to the desert to be scrapped. Their metal is recycled into soda cans and window frames. But there are a few survivors. The biggest fan of the A340 is surprisingly Lufthansa. While other airlines rushed to sell them, the German kept flying them. Why? Because Lufthansa owns these planes completely. They don't have to pay expensive monthly rents to banks. For them, the A340-600 is still a useful workhorse, carrying hundreds of passengers out of Munich and Frankfurt every day. There is also a strange sanctuary for these planes in the Middle East – Iran. Because of international sanctions, Iranian airlines cannot buy new jets from Boeing or Airbus. They are desperate for parts and planes. So they secretly buy old A340s from all over the world. If you go to Tehran today, it is like a time capsule, full of these four-engine legions flying for Mahan Air. But perhaps the most famous A340s were once used by the German government. For years, the German chancellor flew on the VIP version of the A340 named Konrad Adenauer. But remember, this is the unlucky plane. The government jet became a national joke. It broke down constantly. It had electrical failures, tire problems. Once Chancellor Angela Merkel was on her way to the G20 summit in Argentina, and the plane's communication system failed completely. She had to land and take a commercial flight like a normal passenger. Eventually, Germany got tired of the embarrassment and retired the planes early. Today, the market value of an A340 is shockingly low. You can buy a functioning A340 for $12 million. That is the price of a small, second-hand business jet. You could technically buy one yourself. But be warned, the plane is cheap. But filling the gas tank just once might cost you more than the plane itself. Conclusion. The story of the Airbus A340 is not a story of failure, it is a story of bad timing. This wasn't a bad plane. In fact, it was a magnificent machine. It was comfortable, quiet, and incredibly safe. It did everything the engineers asked it to do. But it was defeated by something it couldn't fight: the price of oil and the relentless march of technology. It was a victim of progress. As we watch the last A340s disappear from our airports, we are losing something special. We are losing the era of elegance. There is something powerful about seeing a plane with 4 engines. It looks strong. It looks like it's over the sky. But the aviation world doesn't care about beauty. It cares about efficiency. Today the skies are filled with twin-engine jets that all look exactly the same. They are cheaper, they are cleaner, and they are sensible. But they are also a little bit boring. The A340 was the last of its kind. It was the unluckiest plane in the world. But for those of us who love aviation, it will always be one of the most beautiful. Now I want to ask you, do you miss the era of 4-engine giants? Or do you prefer the efficiency of modern twin jets? Write your thoughts in the comments. If you learned something new today, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to support me. As a new channel, every subscriber truly counts and motivates me to create better stories. Thanks for watching and see you next time!